but still there. And Jim says that's, I asked him, is that it? And he goes, yeah, that's it.
How much distance-wise do you think is there?
We
talking a couple hundred feet? We talking a mile?
200 yards, 400 yards, and then there's another section above it. If you look right here, that picture I took was right about there in this area right here. And then there's another little section that didn't get filled in right here. I just think that when they built this, they just simply filled it in. And then just left that because it's too deep and they didn't have enough dirt. So they just left it. But they did this. Now, I got this idea because some people, archaeologists have been looking at old aerials and finding Indian villages from the years past. They've been finding the disturbed dirt from their villages. So that's where I thought, well, I'm going to look at the aerials. And it worked. So yeah, that is, as far as I can tell, the only original remaining. Jim said, well, can you help me make some money off of this? And I said, well, not if you don't want everyone walking across your field. I don't think they want to do that, especially after you poured your manure on it. So I said, well, would you care if we put a sign up on the road right there? He said, show people. He said, yeah, sure, just let me know if that's something you want to do. But he said, but just please don't tell people they just can't walk across my field anytime they feel like to go look at it. They got to work it out. So this is the view.
Bill, is that the site where I metal detected off on the right there?
Yeah, that's where you found your penny. Right?
Found the 1901.
You found a 1901 penny.
No.
So if you're standing right here, and this is where Ben Mead stood, looking for the canal. If you look, you can't tell. There it is, right there. And it came right down to the road right here and that. You stood there, you wouldn't know. You saw this, you wouldn't know. I mean, there's no way. You're just standing there, you say, oh, that's a canal. And you can see the farmer has obeyed the restriction from the federal government. You can't farm on this land because they paid that bill. And you can see he's repairing a drain. Well, just so happens, that drain's not too far from the canal line. So the canal ran through here, you just can't see it from the road. You actually have to go out there and walk on it. This is the other side of, this is looking the other way. I think they done this, the canal people, and then it was channelized by the Conservation Corps. It connects the water coming down that ditch and sends it over to the Blue River. This looks like a canal cut to me. It's just been modified. So I'm pretty sure that they dug it because this road didn't exist when the canal was built. So modifications post-abandonment. As I mentioned, the ditch is protected by the government. I believe the CCC was active in Noble County during those years, and I'm still trying to pull their records. And I'm sure they did because they were having flooding problems, because the canal never finished. The water was coming down where it used to be in a marsh. Now all that water's coming down every time it rains, the fields flood. So they got involved and fixed it. So what's the legacy of the Erie, Michigan? Well, in 1850, the Indiana legislature released the rights to the Erie, Michigan back to the counties and said, we're done. We're not going to mess with it. However, in 1854, the chief engineer for the Wabash and Erie moved from Terre Haute to Fort Wayne, and they were having problems with low water between Avoided Creek and Lagro, however you pronounce it. So he researched the concept of bringing Sylvan Lake water down to Avoided using a feeder. He was trying to figure out how I could take advantage of all that water the canal had set up. How can I get that down, because they were having low water issues? He gave up. He found out what it was going to cost. There was no money. As you know, the Butler bill, changed the financing, so he let it go. But the surveys continued, and there are years and years of surveys, because every time the Erie Canal got upgraded, everybody wanted to upgrade the canal all the way through Indiana. So they wanted to extend it to Chicago. And actually the final survey done that I'm aware of was a water level canal from Chicago to Toledo. It's called a water level route because it didn't go through any summits. It would dig through it. And why? Because several states had received funding during that time. There was the the Florida Barge Canal, which was partially finished. It's not done and will never finish. It was canceled by Nixon. And then there was the the Tennessee Tom Bigby Canal, which is done. And it runs from the Tennessee River down to Mobile. But when all that money was being made, being allocated by the government, everybody, every state wants money. When something's being built for something, they want some of that money for the same reason. So was it a waste of money or time? Well, when they start building it, the population of Chicago was less than 4,000. So Chicago wasn't the impetus. The population of Michigan City was only 1,400. So why was Michigan City such a big deal? Well, I found out that Michigan City was created through a land speculator from Crawfordsville, Indiana. He bought all that land there on Lake Michigan to build, because he was thinking the same thing. All that commerce is going to come through Michigan City and go to New York on the Erie Canal. This is going to be a boom town. So a lot of people moved there. So that's why Michigan City, and how much influence he put on Sam Hanna or anybody in the improvements board, I don't know. Also on the canal is a little town of Port Mitchell. It's not even a town, it's an unincorporated town now. Named after the engineer for the Erie, Michigan. But you know who founded that town? Sam Hanna. And the guy who owned all the land was platted. They even tried to be the county seat of Noble County, and they lost. So it's an unincorporated town right now, but it's weird to see a port in the middle of the state. So clearly Samuel Hanna it just so happens that was about a day's distance by packet boat from Fort Wayne. So I'm thinking he was thinking that was going to be a way stop where people could spend the night before moving on to Michigan City and vice versa. So I think he had some motives in Fort Mitchell. By 1850, Chicago was exploding. In just a few years, it was up to 24,000 people. Talk of building a canal in Michigan City didn't make sense anymore because Chicago was blowing up. So it was the right idea in the right place. It just came at the wrong time. The technology for building canals of that type over that type of summit and water level just was too much for what we knew at that time on how to build canals. So here's my references and credits, all the things I've read, researched, talked to people, asked them, emailed them. Some of it's online, some of it I had to call them and get some information. Here's a lot of the books, they read. This is a really good book if you want to read about Butler's angst about the Butler bill. A book I'll show you here that I've got with me. This is a book that was published in 1905. It's called The Michigan and Erie Ship Canal, which is in reverse the names. And this was a book published to justify building a new canal from Toledo through Indiana. And talks about, the commerce. It's a promo document, but it was printed in 1905 to try to push the canal. So, that being said, what questions do you have for me about the work they tried to do back in the 1930s? Yes.
If the federal government offered any land to sell, canal land to help finance that canal.
Yes. But Indiana just let it go when they to get it off their hands. The canal was.
Yeah, the land, a lot of times the land the federal government gave to sell.
Right.
Anyway.
Right. I found one article by, there's a guy named J.J. Knox, who's buried in Noble County. He was all excited, and the article said, because the canal was going to go through his land. And I found his land on the plat map. And sure enough, it was where the canal was going to go into the Elkhart River. And he owns all that land right there. So yeah, that's, some people were excited. But when they first started looking at the land, there wasn't a lot of people out there. It was literally while they were surveying, people were moving in like crazy. You know, the land grant office was in Fort Wayne, and they were overwhelmed with the people moving west. So, remember, all the power and tax revenue was in the south when this started. So that's probably why nobody was getting upset that the
I
canal
mean,
was
southern part of Indiana.
Yeah, southern part of Indiana, yes. So that, I think that's another reason why there was just not a whole lot of urgency about it, because nobody lived there. I mean, 1832, Chicago was, it was nothing, it was an town of onion fields, Kinsey's Cabin. So, people, other than the commerce off the lake, Chicago wasn't a part of it. It had no bearing on it being built.
You talked about the survey chains. How do they determine elevation in any place in doing the surveys? I mean, today we use GPS, and it's very accurate. What about, how do you do it back then?
That's a good question. Does anyone know how they measured elevation back then?
Water runs downhill.
Oh,
No,
yeah.
they had ways of doing it. I mean, if the Romans built aqueducts.
Yes.
And made the water go downhill, but they had instruments, and with the chains, they would be able to level. I mean, they had a level, what we call site level.
Yeah.
And you would hold the chain as level as you could, and then measure down. I mean, it's amazing because the Clay County History Book states that the feeder dam on the Eel River was so many feet higher than the door sill in the Eagle County Courthouse.
They knew what the elevation change from Fort Wayne to the summit was, and exactly how many feet the down elevation was from Summit to Michigan City. It was way, way deeper, further. But yeah,
It's still
It's amazing
amazing
how they did that.
with all the woods and the terrain that they could sight through that and determine elevation, but
I don't know. It's a good question, though. Great question.
What was the biggest physical obstacle on this one?
Largest physical obstacle? Meaning,
For making the canal?
well, it's getting over the water and the summit.
Okay.
I mean, the summit, it was the highest summit of all the canals, but they just didn't have enough water. Yes?
How much of the canal was actually dug and how long did that take?
Well, the canal stopped, they were only there, I think, for one season in the summer.
They used it?
It was never used.
No, never used.
There was never water. Once they got the letting covered several parts. The feeder from Lake Sullivan and this other part of the letting was to build a dam on chain legs. And build and cut and get it down to the end of Noble County. That's as far as the letting was allowed. Way back in the corner.
So I'm a geologist. I think from measuring the elevation, they used a Jacob staff. So it's an extendable staff, and you'd have a person with a sight, and you would sight the staff that's incremented off, and you'd have to have two people, one holding the staff on the sights. But then you'd have to come to that person, take another staff, and sight that. It would be arduous to do it.
Yeah. Well, I was reading the survey report, and they said, well, we rode our horse up to the summit. And then we saw, when we reached the summit, I'm like, they're in trees, 10 feet tall, forest. How do they know they're at the,
But the woods weren't nearly as bad then as they are now. The ancient bush honeysuckle has been the thing that's made a lot of this difficult.
difficult to get through?
And the woods were actually much more open back then.
Okay.
If you go to the Port Arboretum, you'll
I've
see
been
that they keep an example on each side of the road.
Interesting. Yes, sir.
So one of the things that I thought was really interesting, I studied a lot about summit canals, but I've never seen a tri-level split like that. That was, having going through.
Oh, the Continental Divide right
Yeah,
now?
that's really interesting.
Well, there was a lot of arguing as to where the canal was going to go through the summit. And some people thought it should have gone north through Cedar Creek to the back of Sylvan Lake. Some people thought it should have been moved farther west closer to the tip of the canoe and gone around that way. But they went that way because that's where the water was. They were gonna build 2 dams. Chain of Lakes, would have been, if those dams had been built, it would have been underwater. There were gonna be 2 dams built there. There's gonna be a lot of water there. So the fact that dams never got built and it later became a park, well, you know, if those dams had been built, they would have been 2 huge lakes there. Yes,
Were the feeder canals navigable?
yes. The one from Sylvan to, it was gonna flow between, north of Albion and south of Waka, near Augusta. It would have been, it was to be a navigable feeder. When I showed you that picture, there was a prism there that was intended to be ultimately navigable.
Prison?
Prism is if you take a slice of a canal and turn it on its side and look at its depth, with no paths on each side, that's a prism. Mhm. You know, there's a lot of the survey marks were based on residences, like Elliott's Mill. You know, I had to go find maps. Where's Elliott's Mill? I finally had to go to the historian in Noble County and say, where the blazes is Elliott's Mill? Well, Elliott's Mill was, you drive right by it on, I think it's Indiana State Road 9, right when the Chain of Lakes Park ends. To the left was Elliott's Mill. He sold it to a gentleman named Forker, and Forker's Creek is right there, so it got renamed. But all the marking, all the references for the canal on that side of the summit was all based off Elliott's Mill, and that was like a, you know, all right, where is it? Another one was, the surveyor was having a hard time figuring out how to cross Grapevine Creek. Well, the surveyor notes were jumbled. They weren't like in sequence of the canal's route. It was just his notes, and he just spit them out. So it took me a good 2 or 3 weeks to find where's Grapevine Creek. I asked Noble County, and they said there is no Grapevine Creek, nowhere. So I looked, I found an old 1836 plat map of South Bend. Grapevine Creek is now Shanks Ditch, west of South Bend. But he had to build a thing. It's called Grapevine Creek. If you go look on Google Maps, you'll see that creek is surrounded by grapevines still. It's farmed, but the whole creek is just tons of grapevines along it. So he was talking about how he had to get the canal down across Grapevine. Yes?
Have you thought about contacting the big pipeline companies that have done big natural gas pipelines across northern Indiana? And their surveyors, or their backhoe operators have come across anomalies in the ditch, like cross section of something.
I haven't. I'm not aware of any pipelines in that area. There's old railroad areas, but I'm not aware of any pipelines.
Oh,
I did email the project manager for NDOT when the 69 was being built north of Evansville. I warned them that there is a canal crossing south of the Potomac River. I said, be careful because there's a typhoid coming. You may come across the cemetery, you know, the canal side, grave side. But that's the only time I've actually ever reached out to anybody about that.
I would think that there's, numerous pipelines crossing Indiana.
Yeah,
Natural gas, gasoline.
Sure.
Into the big refineries in Detroit. That might be just another resource.
yeah.
Put on your list. The surveyors go out there and they'll tell what they found.
Wabash and Erie is still on all the modern topographical maps. If you go look at some, topographical maps going in the 70s, you'll still see the Wabash and Erie is marked on topos. On the topos, there are no area Michigan Canal. It was never registered as, is it used for that? So it's not on anyone's map. I was surprised when they built I-69 that they didn't, they had it on their surveys. They actually had it marked.
With all the work that they did in the 30s as part of the Great Depression with the WPA and CCC, which you well mentioned, the CCC dredgings. The federal government got very involved in chronicling all of this stuff.
That's right.
I assume you went to the Interior Department information to try to find some of that. I assume.
I haven't gone to them for CCC stuff. That's why I started in Kendallville, and then a few months ago, I tried to go through Fort Wayne to see where the CCC offices were in Fort Wayne. And I'm assuming it's in a museum or library. I will probably have to go to a museum or library in Fort Wayne just to see if they have anything. It may have been sent all back to Washington DC. I don't know yet. It's a working theory, just because I know they were active. There was a notation in one of the things I read that somebody had found a campsite on their property, had dishes and stuff, junk. And that's a typical CCC thing. They would set up tents and they slept out there. And they cooked and they ate while they worked. So I have a feeling they may have uncovered, they thought it was a canal work team, but they didn't bring dishes, they just had a bag. So I have a feeling that was a CCC.
That is the reason, because I know like before they did a lot of the dredges and stuff like that, the federal government actually came in and surveyed a lot of those lands.
Exactly.
And
that's
they
what
have
I wanna
those
look at.
records, just
That's why I
getting a
wanna
hold
see
of
it.
them.
I want to see what the survey they had of what they did and how that canal was set up when they came in 100 years after it was built. And it's almost been 200 years now since that was started.
Well, Phil, we certainly appreciate all the research you did, and it was very presentation. So let's give him a big.